Sun City book lovers, welcome to Meet the Author. This show is made possible by Sun City Hilton Head Lifestyle Services, giving us a chance to learn more about the books we want to read and the people who create them.
Welcome to Meet the Author. This month we are fortunate to be revisited by Deb Richardson Moore with her new book, Through Any Window. Oh my gosh, readers, you have so much that you're going to get from this particular novel. So let's meet the author. Deb, there is so much in this new book, Through Any Window. So I'm going to let you condense the description or the premise for prospective readers.
Okay, sure. In short, the main, well, we'll give you the main mystery. We'll give you the subplots. But there's a woman, a young woman who is drinking far too much, and she's been accused of a murder down in Alabama. But they have been sort of harassing her for a year and a half, but they can't make the charges stick. And so they haven't been able to make an arrest. So she flees to her cousin's house in South Carolina. Unbeknownst to her, her cousin plans to frame her for a murder she wants to commit. And so that's the setup. The important part of it is the cousin lives in a gentrifying neighborhood in a fast-growing southern city. And so all those issues are coming into play with, mansions next door to boarding houses, next door to boarded up mill houses, next door to encampments in the woods. And so when the murders eventually occur, police don't know if it was personal or if it was a result of all those economic tensions.
Like I said, there's a lot here. I have read the book, and I've read the reviews for the book, including Southern Literary Review. And I hope I can, get this straight. If I recall, they said that Through Any Window is a compelling mystery that checks off all the right boxes. And I love this word, a twisty, well-paced plot with not just one, but 3 unsolved murders. Like I said, there's a lot. What were the challenges to you then in taking on this complex project, this book?
Well, what happens is they call writers either outliners or pantsers. And I've never really been sure what that means. I think it means flying by the seat of your pants.
I think so.
Well, that's what I do, because otherwise I don't think I would enjoy the writing. So I fly by the seat of my pants. And so as things started occurring to me, because in the beginning, Riley's sister was not a big character.
No.
And so by the end, I realized, oh my goodness, I'm going to make her a bigger character. So I had to go back and plant a childhood scene and a teenage scene. And so that's really the only way to do it. If you write like I do, and you're just, things are occurring to you as you go, you just got to be willing to go back and tear up some chapters to insert new material.
Well, let's look at a little bit of what influenced you in this book. You live in Greenville, South Carolina, and you've had a 15-year career with a church there called Triune Mercy Church.
Mercy Center.
And I understand that was quite an influence on how you developed this book. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. Our church was at the edge of a decaying mill village in Greenville. Greenville grew up around 7 textile mill villages. That was the sort of the impetus of the city. And as those, when we got to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s, those textile jobs went overseas. And so those mill villages fell into decay. And there were drug houses and bootleg houses and prostitution and blood, selling your blood centers, all those kinds of things. Well, my church sat right on the edge of one of those, and we served the homeless, and we had a lot of homeless members. Well, when I first got to the church, the neighborhoods were in decay, and there were a lot of abandoned houses where the homeless were sneaking in and squatting, and then all those other things I mentioned. as we went on, but we were only about 4 or 5 blocks from Main Street, Greenville, which was undergoing a huge renaissance. So as those years passed, a lot of those old houses were torn down, and very nice $800,000, $900,000, $1 million homes were built instead. So we watched it. We watched as that some of the neighbors had moved in with the understanding of this is what it means to be an urban dweller. Some moved in and then decided everybody who had been there before needed to go. And so, yes, it was just watching those issues that led to the writing.
Well, in that same vein, I looked at your characters. I considered them very readable. There are so many layers in so many characters. I've already said I think they could be their own books. Spin-offs. We could have the spin-offs like on TV. But I wondered, and I know you've been a journalist in Greenville as well, were any of those based on real-life encounters?
Probably the one most taken from my experience would have been Caleb, who was the 21-year-old homeless person. And he wasn't anybody in particular, but he was probably a combination of 6 to 8 young men that I had met. And those people, we tried so very hard to intervene in their lives because they still had a chance.
Right.
So many people we dealt with were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s. And, there wasn't a whole lot we could do as far as the trajectory of their lives. Beyond, we could do meals and medical care, and that even tried to get them in housing, but, they weren't going to go to college.
Right.
Yeah. With those young boys, we tried so hard, but I'm telling you, they were up against it. Almost all, Caleb, as you know, was raised by a drug addict mother, and she wasn't just a drug addict, she was mean.
Oh.
She was mean when she didn't need to be mean. And that was what he had grown up with. So he had 3, 4, 5 strikes against him before he ever started. Did he make some bad decisions? Absolutely, yes. But what I try to point out is, would any of us have made better decisions were we starting where he was?
Mm-hmm. I look at, and I've lived in Greenville for several years, so I had to keep looking back at this, and it was interesting for me to think about the gentrification. Mm-hmm. I saw it happen. And I wonder, when you look back, especially having written the words now, what are the positives and negatives to such a rapid growth? What does that do to a city and its existing population?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There are a lot of positives. When I got home from college, I went to work for the newspaper. And all of the young people who worked for the newspaper thought you had to go to Atlanta on the weekend. There was absolutely nothing in Greenville. Now, were they kind of snobbish about it? Yeah. But I had to agree with them. There really wasn't much.
I have to say, when I first moved to Greenville, I was one of those people.
Yes, exactly. Well, now, oh my gosh, people come into Greenville for theater and concerts and restaurants, and from all over the region. So that is a positive. No doubt about it. However, on the other hand, people who have lived there all their lives, making the salaries that they have always made, can hardly afford the real estate now. My own daughter, when she got ready to buy a house, had to go way out to Malden.
Right. Malden, Simpsonville.
Yeah. Because she just couldn't. She wanted to live in the Greenville area and just could not afford it. And so, because all these people are coming in from other areas with having had real estate sales back home that were just huge, $1.5, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million homes. And then you can still buy an awful lot with that in Greenville. Mm-hmm. But it outpriced many of us who had been raised
right. Many people love mysteries. Many of us can't wait to turn the next page, the next chapter, to see what's going on. You've given us 3 of those in this book, so we've been certainly blessed. But I couldn't help feeling, and I think all readers will feel, as we turn those pages, the mystery was there for us, but there were also societal themes, ones that we often don't want to discuss: gentrification, its effect on homelessness, the bias that occurs there, addiction. What would you say to all of us? Because when we close that last chapter, I don't think we walk away feeling like, oh, we didn't know that was going to happen. What a great twist. I think we also walk away with some other thoughts. What do you hope those will be?
Well, I hope so. My biggest, what I hope is a reader's biggest takeaway is that a person's character has nothing to do with whether he's or she rich or poor, black or white, housed or homeless. And that I try to show there are good, bad, and in between on all of those economic levels. And not to have caricatures of, the bad industrialist, the bad banker, but have, good and bad in all of those levels. And then, because there's Caleb, who I think has a lot going for him, well worth saving. And I try to end with some hope for him. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, there's his mother, who was just, and there's the possible rapist and so I'm not trying to picture a Pollyanna vision of homelessness by any means, because criminals hide among homeless encampments. Like I say, there's just good and bad all through it, and where you land economically has just nothing to do with the person you are.
Mm-hmm. Now, what's next in your writing?
It's a book called The Last Beach Town. It's set down in your area of the country.
Okay.
On a fictional barrier island in South Carolina.
Okay. All right. Well, you're covering all the, from upstate to low country. Okay. And how can readers keep in touch with you?
My website has just DebRichardsonMoore.com, has my phone number, has my email address, and I just love text, phone calls, emails, anything's fine.
Thank you for the time you've spent with us. This is a great read, everyone, and not just the mysteries. You're going to learn a lot.
So today I'm going to talk about this year's release, Through Any Window. And that's this book here. In 2020, I retired as pastor of Triune Mercy Center, which is a mission church that included a lot of Greenville's homeless citizens. Greenville is where I've lived my whole life. Well, I'd written 5 books during my working years as a pastor, and I thought I'd really start pumping out the manuscripts now that I was retired. For a long time, I'd had a seed of an idea about a young woman with a drinking problem who gets caught up in a murder. But I wanted her drinking to be a danger beyond sort of a wild social life, so I made her a minister. That way, her job would be in danger if anybody found out, so she would always be trying to hide it. Well, I wrote about 12 chapters, and I got stuck. So then, I made her a cousin of Brannigan Powers, and Brannigan is the protagonist of these books, the Brannigan Powers series. And so I figured that Brannigan could swoop in and help her out when things got too bad. I wrote about 12 chapters, and I got stuck. About this time, my husband and I went to Key West. And so I started 2 different mysteries set there. I even walked around and took pictures of the houses and the trees and the restaurants and the historic district to remember once I got home. But I wrote about 2 chapters of each of those and got stuck. I had never had this much trouble getting into a book before. I thought writing was going to be my retirement life, but I guess there was no guarantee. And I was starting to panic a little bit. But then I set Riley, who was my hard-drinking 25-year-old, into a gentrifying neighborhood in a fast-growing southern city. And rather than tell the whole novel from her first-person perspective, which I think was the problem, I surrounded her with characters who each had their own perspective about what was happening in that neighborhood. The first time I can remember reading a book like that was Jodi Picoult, and you probably have read her. And she uses that technique quite a bit. You know, each chapter is told sort of from the head of a different character. And so they each bring their own perspective. You know, we call that multiple point of view characters. So with those two changes, a gentrifying neighborhood is the setting, multiple points of view, I was finally able to write Through Any Window. Whew, what a relief. So here's how it starts. And this is the prologue sort of, and it's the night of. Riley never knew what woke her. A giggle, a sigh, a moan. Someone else was in the pool house. She slipped from the bed that wasn't hers, clutching its lightweight comforter as a shield, and tiptoed to the closed bedroom door to listen. Another giggle and a responding murmur. Two people, and they weren't trying to be quiet. Don't they know I'm here? Another thought occurred to her. She wasn't supposed to be here. For the first time all summer, she had left the restaurant early. Blood swooshed in her ears, making it hard to hear what was going on. The pair wasn't likely to be Michaela and Luke, who had the run of the expansive main house, unless they were playing out, a cabana pool boy fantasy? She considered proper Michaela and her banker husband. Doubtful. Then who? The neighbors used the pool freely, but Riley had been living there for 3 months, and the pool house was her space, her home, for the moment anyway. Riley held her breath and turned the doorknob a 1/4 inch, then another quarter, and another. The knob was new enough that it rotated soundlessly. She pushed, and the door swung open, silent as absence. Outside, storm clouds blackened the sky, but pool lights gleamed through the glass doors and illuminated two people on the sofa, half-dressed, entwined. She could make out one, but not the other. Scenes from the summer whirred and clicked into place, and she was pretty sure she knew the identity of the hidden one. A flash of lightning and clap of thunder, all but simultaneous, made her jump. The long-awaited storm had arrived. A torrent of rain hammered the pool house roof, causing a roar before the thunder crashed off to the east. Movement across the living room caught her attention, and she lifted her eyes to the kitchen doorway some 20 feet away. Another figure stood watching the oblivious couple as they moaned and writhed. The figure's arms slowly rose and pointed. Is that a gun? Riley started to cry out, but her throat locked. She swallowed and tried again, but before she could shout a warning, light and sound exploded. This time, it wasn't the storm. She ducked back inside her bedroom and crouched on the floor, pulling the comforter over her head. She rocked back and forth, shivering, her panicked breath too shallow to pull air into her lungs. She heard groans from the living room and a man's hoarse cry. A door slammed. This couldn't be happening again. It simply couldn't. Riley closed her eyes and rocked and rocked and rocked. Does anyone know why I wouldn't just use the real name of the city? Well, if you use the real name of a city, you've got to be really precise about naming everything correctly. Every street where you say it is, the post office, the grocery stores, all that kind of stuff, or you're going to have people calling you up. And also I needed like a pizza restaurant in a specific place where there isn't one. And I needed, some other things. And so it's a lot easier just to thinly veil it with fiction. Well, modern Greenville grew from a crescent of textile mill villages. In the mid-1900s, it was called the textile capital of the world. Not just the nation, mind you, but the world. Which was fine until those textile jobs moved overseas and the mills closed. The surrounding villages fell into poverty. Drugs moved in, bootleg liquor houses, prostitution, homeless encampments. Development took place in the cow pastures out on the east side of town, while the west side fell into disrepair. Well, for 15 years, I pastored a church on a main west side artery on the edge of one of the villages called Poe Mill. At Triune, I dealt with people who lived in burned out warehouses, with prostitutes who were assaulted in abandoned buildings, with people who overdosed in the woods. We welcomed homeless people into worship and served hot meals, provided medical care, referrals for drug rehab, legal aid, help in finding housing, you name it. But mostly what we did was provide a welcome, a means of fellowship and relationship and belonging for those who didn't get it anywhere else. A homeless man once asked me, "Pastor, do you know the worst thing about being homeless? It's not being cold or wet or hungry. The worst thing about being homeless is being looked right through." So we tried to look. Well, as we were going about the business of doing that, huge changes were taking place around us. Greenville's longtime renovation of its downtown took flight. It got positively glitzy, if anybody of you have been there recently, and became a tourist destination. It's on the top 10 list of downtowns in just about any list you read. There's a Swamp Rabbit Trail that stretches out past Furman University to the north and all the way to the southern part of Greenville County. It's a walking and biking trail, and it bisects a brand new inner city park called Unity Park. Breweries and restaurants and coffee shops have located there. Playgrounds, still to come, a high-rise scenic tower. And all around that park, where there were once 4-room mill houses and boarded up properties, there are now mansions and townhouses and loft apartments in the former mills. Though a lot of our neighbors supported Triune and embraced the fact that homelessness was an unfortunate part of urban living, others complained. They wanted Triune and the Greenville Rescue Mission and the Salvation Army and homeless people in general to simply go away. Well, and through any window, I deal with a lot of those issues through the vehicle of a murder mystery. So what's it about? Riley is the hard-drinking young woman who was previously accused of a murder in Alabama. Police there don't have enough to charge her, so she flees to her cousin's home in South Carolina. Unbeknownst to her, the cousin plans to set her up for a murder she is planning. So, the book has Riley's point of view, of course, but then there's her rich cousin, whom she comes to live with. There's her cousin's rich next-door neighbor, who is married to the neighborhood's primary developer. And there's a young homeless man who secretly moves into the potting shed in the developer's backyard. And if you think that's unlikely, believe me, I can introduce you to many homeless people who did that exact same thing. Well, with that set up, the novel finally took off. There was so much in each character's backstory to delve into, and there were so many issues in this gentrifying neighborhood to delve into. So I got the book written to my satisfaction. And then came the really hard part. I knew it was time to leave my publisher in England. They had published all my previous books, but they had been acquired by another company and things were not going well. So I was looking at other publishers. I'd written the book in present tense, and one publisher said she just couldn't read anything in the present tense. If she wanted me to read it, I was going to have to redo it. So I took a few weeks, wrote the whole thing in past tense. But before she even had time to get to it, another publisher accepted it. And this new one said, "Did you hire an editor to go over this before you submitted it? Or are you really that good at grammar and spelling?" And I said, "Well, I was a news reporter for 27 years. We had to know grammar and spelling." So I'm thinking, wow, this editing's going to be a breeze if she thinks that. And then they assigned me an editor who gave me 24 pages of notes, including taking Riley out of first person in her section. I had never rewritten a book that much. But in the end, I think it did turn out better. And as a nutshell, as I may have mentioned last summer, my writing started with The Weight of Mercy. That's a memoir about my first 3 years as pastor of Triune. And in it, I tell about the weight, the burden, the underbelly of dealing with the poor and the addicted and the homeless who made up our church. And I also talk about how we just simply began trying things. And if they worked, we kept them. If they didn't, we dropped them. We failed left and right. But slowly, very, very slowly, Triune turned into something else, an economically diverse congregation in which rich and poor, black and white, housed and homeless worshiped together. A place in which everyone was invited to belong. Every drug dealer and prostitute and sex offender, every banker and student and professor. Well, after the book came out, we had visitors from New York to Florida to Kansas come to visit us seeking advice on how to include homeless parishioners in their congregations. I was invited to speak at Duke Divinity School and at Harvard. And my publisher said, "Can you write a sequel to it?" But that didn't interest me. I felt like I'd said all I had to say about ministry to homeless people. And so I told him I'd always wanted to write a murder mystery. And he kind of gulped and said, "Okay." For the center of the entire series, because he asked me to set it up as a series if I was going to do that, and I pulled on that comment from one of my homeless parishioners, "The worst thing about being homeless is being looked right through." So in The Cantaloupe Thief, in The Cover Story, and Death of a Jester, a homeless man is able to help newspaper reporter Brannigan Powers solve their town's murders because he sees and hears things that other people don't. And I write about other people we don't see: retail clerks, maintenance workers,